Hey guys, so we are coming up on St. Patrick's Day, and many of you might know that I live in Massachusetts. Not quite Boston, but close enough that we'll call it Boston. St. Patrick's Day is a huge deal here, and everyone is Irish on St. Patrick's Day. Now, when I was a kid, long before I was vegan, every St. Patrick's Day we had corned beef and cabbage in a traditional boiled dinner. And I really wanted to teach you guys how to recreate something similar as a vegan version. Now, you guys know I love seitan. I love making various mock meats. It's one of my favorite things to do on this channel, but corned beef is a little bit different. Corned is another word for pickled. So what corned beef is it's essentially a pickled brisket. And traditionally, it's a brisket that's pickled in a boiled brine for sometimes up to 10 days. So we're not gonna take 10 days, although you could let this marinate in its brine overnight for an even saltier, more pickled roast. Now you can have this roast as a boiled dinner. You could slice up the seitan and use it for Reubens. There's so many things that you could do with this that I'm actually going to make two for myself, so we can have one boiled dinner with the family and then the rest as Reubens for the rest of the week. But if you are not interested in pickled mock meats, then you can skip the entire brining step and just go straight from the seitan dough to the cooking part, and then you won't have such a salty pickled flavor to it. But let's dive right in. Okay, so the actual dough for the seitan roast is pretty simple. We're gonna use 2 cups of vital wheat gluten. That's 240 grams, which I personally like to weigh my flours and things because I find that measuring cups are all a bit different. We are going to use a spice blend here. I have a teaspoon of onion powder, a teaspoon of coriander powder, a half a teaspoon of salt. We don't need to add a lot of salt to this because we're going to be pickling it in brine, and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And those are the dry ingredients. I'm just gonna mix those together. Next, we are gonna add 1 cup of vegetable broth, and I just use the vegetable better than bouillon. We're gonna add a tablespoon of a whole seed mustard. I mean, you could use any mustard you want, but I prefer it with the whole mustard seeds for this. And also I am going to add a 1/4 cup of pickled beet juice. So you can buy a can or a jar of pickled beets. And obviously the pickled flavor makes sense because of what we're doing here. But also, if you've ever seen corned beef, it is very, very pink. And the reason for that is that the nitrate salt that they use to pickle it is colored pink. So this is just to recreate that pinkness. And then we are going to stir it with a big wooden spoon until you can't anymore. And then we are going to knead it with our hands for about 2 minutes. This activates the gluten and gives it that meaty, chewy texture. Roll up the sleeves, pull back the hair. Yes, my hands are clean. Okay, so you might want to push the dough around the sides of the bowl to sort of pick up the powders. Don't be afraid to really get in it here. So you can see it's forming a dough here. Still a little inconsistent with color, so I'm gonna keep on kneading until the color is completely consistent. Now that I'm doing this, I see that the marbled look, where it's not completely pink, is actually very reminiscent of what I remember corned beef to look like. It's a little freaky, to be honest. Okay, so that is pretty close. Next, we are going to prepare our brine. Okay, so I made my 2 roasts and I put them in, I just use this, it's the inside of my Instant Pot. But what you want is something tall and as thin as you need it to be, because we just need to make enough brine to cover them while they marinate. Now, pro tip, if you wanna do the same thing and make 2 roasts like I am, you still only need to make the same amount of brine. You don't have to double the brine at all because all the brine's purposes is to cover it. So let's start making that brine. All right, now because the lighting at my stove is terrible, I'm gonna mix everything in the pot here, and then I'm gonna simmer it until all of my ingredients have dissolved, give the spices some time to infuse the water, and then cool the brine down. So although we're making quite a bit of brine, you don't actually end up eating a lot of it. It's essentially just a marinade to pickle the roasts. So what you can do as another pro tip is if you want, you can save this brine and pickle cucumbers or other vegetables in it as well. It works great for that. So this is 8 cups or 2 quarts of water. And into that, we are going to add 1 cup of salt. It's a lot of salt. Remember though, we're not actually eating this. It's just a marinade. Half a cup of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of white vinegar, and then we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of pickling spice. I wanted to show this to you guys because I thought you might not know exactly what it is. They're all a little bit different. This one has cinnamon, allspice, mustard seed, coriander, bay leaves, ginger, chilies, cloves, black pepper, cardamom, mace, and it looks like this. So these are the spices that we want to infuse the brine, and that was 2 tablespoons. So now I'm just gonna heat this up to a simmer and let it simmer for about 10 minutes. Okay everybody, so it is much later in the day, about 3.5 hours later. I went to the gym, got some shopping done, and now I'm home. So those roasts have been soaking in that brine this whole time, and I chopped up all my veggies, which I just put in this pot for now. I'm gonna be using this big reusable baking dish. This thing has gotten a lot of love. That's what we're gonna put everything in. I'm also going to need 3 cups of vegetable broth, which is for this whole container of vegetables. So if you're using fewer vegetables, you can use less broth. And I also have a glaze here of 3 tablespoons of whole grain mustard and 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and that's per roast. So what we're going to do is we are going to use parchment paper and wrap up our roast in a neat little package here. So I'm gonna take 1. So here is the roast. I am gonna take half of this glaze here, and I am just gonna spread it on the top. Doesn't have to be perfect, and again, if you're just doing 1 roast, you would put all of it on the top here. Okay. And then I'm going to, not super tight, but fairly tightly, wrap this up like a little package. Go. Okay, and then I'm going to take that and wrap it in foil. And the reason that we're not just wrapping it straight in foil is so that it doesn't all stick. You could use cooking spray, but I've just found this method makes a better roast in my opinion. So this one does not have to be tight. It's almost like a little steaming envelope for the seitan. So it looks like this here. So now we have our big pan, and again, I have cabbage, carrots, onions, and potatoes in here, and I'm just gonna scatter it around the bottom and try to mix everything up. Now I'm gonna take 1 roast, put it here, and put it here. Now I'm gonna take my broth and I'm just gonna dump it over the whole thing. And I'm also gonna take about a 1/2 cup of the pickling brine and dump that over everything as well. Now we're gonna cover the whole thing with foil. And I should mention, if you have a Dutch oven, this is absolutely the perfect time to use it. I just don't have one. So the foil just serves to create like a steaming chamber for the whole dish. And the reason that this cover isn't enough for the seitan is because the seitan, as it cooks, is going to expand to fit whatever container it's in. So that's why we wrap it in the parchment paper and then in the foil. So this is pretty heavy. I'm putting it in the oven at 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to leave it in there for 90 minutes. Okay, so I took the vegetables and everything out of the oven, and the vegetables were cooked, but the roasts were not cooked yet. And then I thought back to previous years. I remembered I screwed something here up. You want to cook the roasts at 450 degrees as they are all wrapped up for 1 hour. Then you want to put them into the big container of vegetables here and cook it for an additional hour. But I kind of did it backwards. The roasts are going to come out exactly the same, but just for you guys so you don't have cold veggies and hot roasts. So I'll show you. My roasts are now in a separate pan, and I'm going to cook these for an hour at 450 degrees, then put them in the container with the vegetables and cook it for an additional hour. Okay, so I just took them out of the oven, and now I can show you what they look like. Open the foil, and now I'm opening the roast. All right, so here's what the roasts look like. I'm gonna use one for family dinner tomorrow night, and one I'm gonna slice up and make Reubens out of. There you go. Hopefully you guys like this. If you give it a try for St. Patrick's Day, let me know. All right.